I returned from a work trip. My comic collection was gone. My wife sold 27 years of collecting for $500 at a garage sale. She sold my $12,000 issue for 50 cents. Opening: the empty room. The flight from Denver had been delayed twice, and by the time I pulled into my driveway at 11:47 p.m. on that Friday night, I was running on stale coffee and the promise of my own bed. 5 days of client meetings, PowerPoint presentations, and hotel room insomnia had left me hollow. But there was one thing I was looking forward to, the same thing I always looked forward to after a work trip: an hour in my office with my collection before bed. My wife's car was in the garage. The kitchen light was on. Normal. Everything normal. I dropped my suitcase in the hallway and headed straight for the back of the house, toward the converted bedroom that served as my sanctuary. I'd spent 3 years perfecting that room: climate control system, UV filtering blinds, custom shelving with anti-vibration mounts. My wife called it excessive. I called it love. The door was already open. That was the first wrong thing. I always kept it closed. Always. The climate control system worked better that way, and besides, it was my space. My one room in our 4-bedroom house that was purely, entirely mine. I stepped inside and hit the light switch. The shelves were empty. Every single shelf. Empty. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. I stood there, hand still on the light switch, staring at the bare wooden shelves that had held 27 years of my life. The display cases were gone. The long boxes were gone. The graded slabs that had lined the top shelf like precious artifacts, gone. My heart didn't stop. It's a cliché to say that, but I understand now why people use it. My heart did something worse. It stuttered, stumbled, and then began racing so fast I thought I might actually pass out. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. Maybe she moved them. Maybe there was a reason. A pipe burst. The roof leaked. Something logical. I walked to the window and opened the blinds. The climate control unit was still there, humming softly in the corner, keeping the empty room at exactly 68 degrees and 45% humidity. Protecting nothing. I heard footsteps behind me. "Oh, you're home. I didn't hear you come in." My wife appeared in the doorway, wearing her silk pajamas and a satisfied smile. "I have great news. I finally cleaned out this room. Sold all those old comics at the garage sale. Made $500. She said it like she was proud. Like she expected me to thank her. I turned to face her, and I watched her smile falter slightly as she registered my expression. "What?" she said. "What's wrong? Where are my comics?" "I just told you. I sold them at the garage sale. You know, the neighborhood sale last Saturday. I finally got around to decluttering this room. I know you've been saying you needed more office space, so—" "I never said that." My voice came out strange. Flat. "I never said I needed more office space. This was my office space. This was my collection room." She waved her hand dismissively. "Well, whatever you want to call it. The point is, I got rid of all that old stuff and made some money. A guy bought the whole lot for $500. Can you believe it? I was only asking for $200, but he was so eager. You sold my entire collection. For $500. Honey, they were just comics. Old ones, too. I don't know why you're looking at me like that. I thought you'd be happy." I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I navigated to my cloud storage, to the folder I kept meticulously updated every month. I found the appraisal document, the one from the insurance company, dated 18 months ago, and held it up for her to see. "Do you know what you did?" She squinted at the screen. "What is that?" "The appraisal. For my collection. The one I showed you when we updated our homeowner's insurance 3 years ago." She didn't take the phone. Her eyes moved across the number at the bottom of the document, and I watched her face change. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that might have been the beginning of fear. "That can't be right," she said. "That says $50,000. $52,000, actually. That was 18 months ago. Some of those issues have appreciated since then. For comics." The way she said it, the absolute incredulity, the slight curl of her lip, told me everything I needed to know about the last 12 years of our marriage. "Yes," I said. "For comics." Update 1. 27 years. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in my empty collection room until the sun came up, surrounded by the ghosts of 27 years of passionate, careful, devoted collecting. I started when I was 8 years old. My grandfather, a quiet man who worked in a printing shop, gave me my first comic book on my 8th birthday. It was an issue of Detective Comics from 1978, nothing spectacular in terms of value, but I remember holding it in my hands and feeling like I'd been given a key to another universe. My grandfather sat with me on his porch that afternoon and we read it together, page by page, panel by panel. He died 6 months later, and that comic became one of my most treasured possessions. That was the first seed in what would become my collection. Over the next 27 years, I hunted. I researched. I saved money from allowances, part-time jobs, and eventually my career as a software engineer. I attended conventions and estate sales. I built relationships with dealers and other collectors. I learned about preservation techniques, about grading standards, about the intricate history of comic book publishing. This wasn't hoarding. This wasn't some random accumulation of childhood nostalgia. This was a carefully curated, museum-quality archive. Every issue was selected with intention. Every purchase was documented. Every comic was protected in acid-free mylar sleeves and stored in climate-controlled conditions. I kept a spreadsheet with over 2,000 entries. Each row contained the issue number, publication date, grade condition, purchase price, purchase date, current estimated value, and, in a column I never showed anyone, a brief note about why that particular issue mattered to me. Detective Comics number 583, first comic after Grandpa's funeral. Felt like he was still with me. Amazing Spider-Man number 300, bought with first paycheck from summer job at 16. Felt like a real collector. X-Men number 141, found at estate sale in Tucson, 2007. Previous owner was a collector who passed at 91. His daughter told me he'd kept it in perfect condition for 40 years. I promised to do the same. These weren't just objects. They were time capsules. They were memories in physical form. They were the connective tissue of my life, binding together the 8-year-old kid who read comics with his grandfather and the 35-year-old man who still found joy in the same pages. My wife never understood that. She never tried to. When we first started dating, she thought my collection was cute. That's the word she used, cute. Like it was a quirk, an eccentricity, something charming that I would eventually outgrow. When we got engaged, she made a few jokes about all those comics taking up space. When we bought the house, she agreed to let me have the back bedroom for my collection, though I noticed her eye roll when I explained the climate control system. Over the years, her attitude shifted from amused tolerance to passive contempt. She would make comments at dinner parties, "Oh, you should see his collection," in a tone that made it clear she found the whole thing embarrassing. She would complain about the electricity cost of the climate control system. She would suggest, every few months, that I could probably sell some of those old things and use the money for something practical. I told her, multiple times, that the collection was valuable. I showed her the appraisal 3 years ago when we updated our insurance. She said, "That's nice," and went back to her phone. She didn't look at the number. She didn't ask questions. She didn't care. Meanwhile, I never said a word about her spending habits. The $3,000 designer handbags that she used for a season and then retired to the closet. The $4,500 weekend yoga retreats. The monthly spa visits and the jewelry and the clothes she wore once and forgot about. Her hobbies were expensive, and I never complained, because they were her hobbies. Her money. Her choices. The difference between us was simple. She had hobbies she spent money on. I had a hobby I spent 27 years of my life building. And she threw it away in a single afternoon because she couldn't be bothered to ask. Update 2. The buyer. By Monday, I had tracked down the buyer. I spent the weekend calling neighbors who had participated in the community garage sale, describing my wife and asking if they remembered who had purchased the large collection of comics. Most of them had been too busy with their own sales to notice, but eventually I found Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down. She remembered the buyer clearly. "Nice young man," she said. "Drove a blue Honda. He seemed very excited about those comics. Your wife was quite happy to make the sale." I asked if she remembered anything else about him, a name, a business card, anything. She shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, dear. I just remember he paid in cash and loaded everything into his trunk. Your wife helped him carry the boxes." My wife helped him carry the boxes. Of course she did. She probably smiled and thanked him for taking all that clutter off her hands. I posted on several collector forums, describing what had happened and listing the most valuable issues from my collection. Within hours, I started getting responses. It didn't take long to find the trail. A collector in Portland recognized my description of the Amazing Fantasy number 15, the crown jewel of my collection, a near-mint copy of the issue that introduced Spider-Man to the world. That single issue had been appraised at $12,000 18 months ago. In today's market, it was probably worth closer to 15. My wife had sold it for 50 cents. The Portland collector told me that an issue matching my description had been listed by a dealer in California just 3 days after the garage sale. The listing price was $14,500. It sold within hours. I reached out to the dealer, explained the situation, and asked if he could tell me who had sold him the comic. He was sympathetic but firm. He couldn't violate seller confidentiality. However, he did tell me that the seller had been a young man who had brought in approximately 40 high-value comics over the course of 2 days. The total amount he had paid for the lot was just over $40,000. $40,000. The buyer, whoever he was, had turned my wife's $500 garage sale purchase into $40,000 within a week. And that was just what he sold to this one dealer. Who knows what he kept for himself, or what he sold elsewhere. I spent hours on eBay and collector forums, watching my life's work scatter to the winds. I found listings for issues I recognized immediately. My childhood copies, the ones I had protected and preserved for decades. They were being sold for fair market value to collectors around the country. Each sale was another piece of my history disappearing into someone else's collection. Some of those comics had inscriptions on the bags, notes I had written to myself years ago. Christmas 1994, from Dad. Or found in that old bookstore in Chicago. I wondered if the new owners would see those notes. I wondered if they would care. Some of the most valuable issues, The Amazing Fantasy No. 15, a near-mint copy of Incredible Hulk No. 181, a complete run of early Iron Man issues, would probably end up in private collections, never to be seen again. Others would be resold for profit, passing through hands that would never understand what they meant. My wife kept asking me what I was doing, hunched over my laptop for hours. I told her I was trying to find my comics. She said, "Can't you just buy new ones?" That's when I realized she still didn't understand. "They're not replaceable," I told her. "First editions aren't replaceable. Childhood memories aren't replaceable. 27 years of hunting for specific issues, of building relationships with dealers, of carefully preserving each comic, that's not replaceable. You can't buy that on Amazon." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "I just thought they were old magazines," she said. "Kid stuff. I told you they were valuable. I showed you the appraisal." "I know, but," she hesitated, "I guess I just didn't believe it. I mean, comics. How could comics be worth that much?" "You didn't believe me. It just seemed exaggerated. You know how you can be about your hobbies." I let that statement hang in the air between us. I let her hear how it sounded. "I showed you official insurance documents," I said. "I had them appraised by a certified professional. You saw the numbers. And you thought I was exaggerating." She didn't have an answer for that. Update 3. The pattern. Over the next 2 weeks, something happened that I hadn't expected. The shock began to fade, replaced by something colder and clearer, recognition. This wasn't the first time my wife had dismissed something that mattered to me. It was just the biggest. I started making a mental list, and once I started, I couldn't stop. 5 years ago, I had been excited about a promotion at work, a senior engineering position I had been working toward for years. I came home to tell her the news, and she interrupted me halfway through to talk about a problem she was having with a coworker. She never asked about the promotion again. 3 years ago, I had signed up for a half marathon. I trained for months, early morning runs and weekend-long distances. She never once asked about my training. On race day, she said she couldn't make it because she had a lunch date with friends. I crossed the finish line alone. 2 years ago, my best friend from college got married, and I was asked to be the best man. I spent weeks writing my speech, practicing in front of a mirror, getting every word right. At the wedding, my wife spent the entire reception on her phone. During my speech, she was texting. 18 months ago, I took up woodworking as a secondary hobby. I set up a small workshop in the garage and started making simple furniture, a bookshelf, a coffee table, a jewelry box for my wife. She took the jewelry box without comment and shoved it in the back of her closet. I found it there a year later, still empty, covered in dust. And now this. 27 years of collecting, destroyed in an afternoon, because she couldn't be bothered to send a single text message. "Hey, is it okay if I sell these comics at the garage sale?" That's all it would have taken. 10 seconds to type. A moment of consideration. A shred of respect. But she didn't ask because she didn't think she needed to ask. She didn't think my things mattered enough to consult me about. She didn't think I mattered enough. I started paying attention to how she talked about my interests. Every time I mentioned something I was excited about, a new project at work, a book I was reading, anything, I watched her face. I saw the subtle glaze that came over her eyes, the way her attention drifted, the slight impatience in her voice when she responded. She didn't hate me. That wasn't the problem. She just didn't see me. She had constructed an image of who I was supposed to be, and anything that didn't fit that image, my silly hobbies, my weird collections, my boring work stories, got filtered out. I realized that I had been married to someone who didn't know me. Someone who didn't want to know me. Someone who had decided, somewhere along the line, that the parts of me she didn't understand weren't worth understanding. The comics were just the most expensive manifestation of that indifference. I started sleeping in the guest room. My wife assumed it was about the comics, and she kept apologizing, kept offering to make it up to me. She suggested a romantic vacation. She offered to redecorate the collection room as a new office space. She even proposed that we could start a new collection together, as if she would ever care enough to participate in something like that. I accepted none of it. Instead, I spent my evenings alone, thinking about what I wanted my life to look like. Thinking about what I was willing to accept. Update 4. The conversation. 3 weeks after I returned from my work trip, I sat down with my wife in the living room. I had asked her to put away her phone, which should have told her this was serious. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, a gulf of leather between us. I need you to understand what you did, I said. Not just what you think you did. What you actually did. She started to speak, but I held up my hand. Please let me finish. This isn't about yelling at you or making you feel guilty. This is about helping you understand why this matters so much. She nodded, her hands folded in her lap. You didn't sell comics, I said. You sold my childhood. You sold the comic book my grandfather gave me on my 8th birthday, the last gift he ever gave me before he died. You sold the issue I bought with my first paycheck at 16, when I felt like a real adult for the first time. You sold comics that had notes and memories attached to them, 27 years of history cataloged and preserved. She was crying now. I wasn't doing this to hurt her, but I wasn't going to stop. You sold my amazing fantasy number 15 for 50 cents. It was worth $12,000. You sold it to a guy who probably knew exactly what it was, who probably couldn't believe his luck. He turned your $500 into $40,000 within a week, because he understood what you never bothered to learn. I didn't know, she whispered. You could have known. I told you they were valuable. I showed you the appraisal. You just didn't listen. You didn't care enough to listen. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. You can't fix this, I said. That's what you don't understand. You can't replace first editions. You can't replace childhood memories. You can't replace 27 years of hunting for specific issues, of building relationships with dealers, of carefully preserving each comic. That's gone forever. Then what can I do? I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. You can explain to me why you didn't ask. What do you mean? I was gone for 5 days. You had my phone number. You could have called me at any point and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about selling your comics at the garage sale. Is that okay?" It would have taken 10 seconds. Why didn't you do that? She was silent for a long moment. I watched her search for an answer, and I watched her realize she didn't have a good one. I didn't think it mattered that much, she finally said. I thought they were just clutter. Old things you were holding onto for no reason. You thought my hobby, my passion, my 27-year collection, was clutter. I didn't understand. You didn't want to understand. I told you, multiple times, that these comics were valuable to me. Not just financially, emotionally, historically, personally. And you decided, without asking, that your judgment was more important than my feelings. She didn't have a response to that. You spent $3,000 on a handbag last month, I said. I never said a word. Never called it silly or wasteful. Never suggested you declutter your closet full of bags you don't use. Because I understood that your purchases were meaningful to you, and I respected that. That's not the same thing. You're right. It's not. Because if I had sold your handbags without asking, I'd expect you to be furious. I'd expect you to feel violated. I'd expect you to question whether I respected you at all. She was crying harder now. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, I said. A mistake is accidentally throwing away one comic when you're cleaning. A mistake is knocking a box off a shelf. This was a decision. You decided that my space, my hobby, and my possessions weren't worth consulting me about. You decided that you knew better than I did what was valuable in my own life. I just thought. That's the problem. You didn't think. Not about me. You never do. The words hung in the air between us. I hadn't planned to say that last part, but now that it was out, I realized it was true. What are you saying? She asked, her voice small. I'm saying that this isn't just about the comics. This is about a pattern. A pattern of you not listening, not caring, not bothering to understand who I am. I've been invisible in this marriage for years, and I just never noticed until you made it impossible to ignore. Update 5. The Aftermath. I filed for divorce 6 weeks after my work trip. My wife was shocked. Over comics, she said, when I told her. You're divorcing me over comics? Over respect, I said. Over boundaries. Over the fact that you destroyed something irreplaceable because you couldn't be bothered to ask. She tried to fight it. Of course she did. She suggested counseling. She suggested a trial separation. She suggested that I was overreacting, being dramatic, blowing things out of proportion. But I had already made my peace with the decision. I had spent 6 weeks grieving, not just for my collection, but for the marriage I realized I'd never really had. I had spent 6 weeks seeing clearly, for the first time, the life I had been living. And I didn't want to live it anymore. The divorce took 9 months to finalize. It was expensive, as divorces tend to be. We split most of our assets evenly, but I negotiated hard for the house, specifically for the collection room that was no longer a collection room. My attorney thought it was an odd priority. I told her it was symbolic. In the end, I got the house. My ex-wife got her share of our other assets and a monthly payment that would last for 2 years. She moved into an apartment downtown, and I never saw her again. The buyer was never found. His trail went cold after the California dealer. Whoever he was, he knew how to disappear once the valuable comics were sold. Part of me hoped he would reach out, maybe offer to sell some of the comics back to me at a reasonable price. He never did. I suppose I can't blame him. He had no way of knowing the circumstances of the sale, and legally, he hadn't done anything wrong. My wife had done something wrong, but not legally. She had made a decision that devastated me, but it wasn't theft. She was selling items from our shared home, and the comics, technically, were marital property. My attorney looked into it, but there was no case. The value was lost, and there was no one to sue. I started over. I built a new workshop in the garage, a real one this time, with proper tools and ventilation. I started making furniture again, and I found that I was good at it. I made a bookshelf for my empty collection room, and then a desk, and then a cabinet with glass doors. I filled the cabinet with the few comics I was able to track down and buy back, a couple of lower value issues that hadn't been worth the buyer's time to flip. They weren't the same. They were reprints, or different editions, or copies in lesser condition. But they were something. A foundation for whatever came next. I didn't start collecting again. Maybe I will someday, but for now, the wound is still too fresh. Every time I see a comic book store, I feel a pang of loss that hasn't faded. Every time I meet another collector at a convention, I think about what I used to have. But I also think about what I gained. I learned that I was married to someone who didn't see me. I learned that respect isn't optional in a relationship. It's fundamental. I learned that the things I care about matter, even if other people don't understand them. And I learned that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is stand up for yourself, even when it costs you everything you thought you had. Epilogue. The price of self-respect. A year after the divorce, I received a message on a collector's forum. A stranger had found one of my old comics, one of the lower value issues from my collection, at a thrift store in Oregon. He recognized my cataloging notes on the bag and tracked me down. He offered to sell it back to me for what he paid, $3. I thanked him, sent him the money plus shipping, and a week later I held a piece of my collection in my hands for the first time in over a year. It was a mid-grade issue of Iron Man from 1987. Nothing valuable, nothing special. But I remembered buying it at a flea market when I was 14, remembered the excitement of finding it in a box of random comics, remembered adding it to my growing collection with pride. I put it in the glass cabinet in my collection room, my empty collection room that was slowly becoming less empty. And I looked at it for a long time. My ex-wife took $50,000 of irreplaceable memories and turned them into $500. I took that as a sign of what she thought I was worth. The divorce was expensive, but at least I know the price of self-respect now. Some losses can't be measured in dollars. Some things can't be replaced. And some lessons, however painful, are worth learning. I'm 36 years old. I have a house, a workshop, a growing collection of handmade furniture, and the beginning of a new comic book collection. I have friends who understand my hobbies, and I have standards for any future relationship that include one non-negotiable requirement: respect. My grandfather would have understood. He was a quiet man who spent 40 years at a printing shop, and his only luxury was a small collection of comics that he kept in a cardboard box in his closet. When he died, my grandmother gave that box to me. I treasured it for years. Those comics are gone now, sold for 50 cents each to a stranger. But I remember what my grandfather told me when he gave me my first comic. The things that seem silly to other people are sometimes the most important things in the world. Don't let anyone tell you what to care about. I didn't. In the end, that cost me a marriage. But it gave me something more valuable, myself. Some things are worth more than money. Some losses can't be measured. And some relationships aren't worth saving if they're built on disrespect. Trust your instincts. Protect what matters to you. And never apologize for caring about something just because someone else doesn't understand. Here's what I learned about respect. It's not optional in a relationship, it's fundamental. The things I care about matter, even if other people don't understand them. 27 years. 27 years of collecting. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. Gone. Sold for 50 cents each at a garage sale. She sold my amazing fantasy number 15 for 50 cents. It was worth $12,000. She sold it to a guy who probably knew exactly what it was. I told her they were valuable. I showed her the appraisal 3 years ago. She said, "That's nice," and went back to her phone. She spent $3,000 on a handbag last month. I never complained. But my comics were clutter. She didn't ask, didn't text, didn't call. Just decided that 27 years of my life was garbage and threw it away. I told her, "You didn't sell comics. You sold my childhood, my memories, 27 years of passion. And you did it without asking because you never respected it enough to care." The buyer turned her $500 into $40,000 within a week. My collection, scattered to the winds. Gone forever. I filed for divorce. She said, "Over comics?" I said, "Over respect. Over boundaries. Over the fact that you destroyed something irreplaceable because you couldn't be bothered to ask." She took $50,000 of irreplaceable memories and turned them into $500. I took that as a sign of what she thought I was worth. The divorce was expensive, but at least I know the price of self-respect now.